What's the most dramatic way you have seen someone or yourself quit their job? I was working at Walmart on the customer service counter. I'd been working at Walmart for roughly 2 years and about 6 months on customer service. We'd always get some nasty verbal abuse from people when we deny returns or tell them that they could only get store credit, but it was usually just name-calling and cursing. But there was one guy that was a real piece of work. He'd try to physically assault us. You see, he'd steal from another Walmart and then try to return the items at a different one for cash. We all knew it, and I have no idea why he wasn't arrested, but he never was. One day he came in when it was a very pregnant coworker and myself. I knew he was often violent, so I told her I'd take him. We went through the normal routine of, you can't get cash without a receipt. When this a-hole decided that he wasn't taking no for an answer. This get full on slapped me across the face hard and left an imprint of his hand. My coworker immediately paged security and store management. When they got there, I said I wanted to call the cops and press charges. I'd had enough of this guy and it needed to stop. Security was all for it, but assistant store manager Bob told me he wasn't going to allow me to do so. Excuse me? So I told Bob he didn't get to make that choice. I was an 18-year-old girl and I'd been assaulted. I wanted the guy in jail. He countered with he was in charge, so it was his decision. I picked up the phone, put on the public address and said, "Duck you, Bob. Duck Walmart." I quit. I got my crap out of my locker, loudly telling everyone I passed that Walmart condones the physical assault of its employees, and I left. Bob did call the cops that day after all, but not to arrest the dude, but to have me barred from the store. It's been almost 30 years and I still haven't been back to that store, and I still feel a hearty duck you, Bob. Story 2. I worked for a candy factory as CSR. At first, it was good, but the more you sat and watched and heard, the more red flags and toxicity came out. Owner had little man syndrome and had a hate-on for all women, including his wife and daughter. If you weren't kissing his butt to stay on his good side, you were immediately the enemy and treated like crap. My first time quitting was because my CSR coworker had an issue working with me, wouldn't speak with me. If I asked her a question, she would ignore me. If I did a dual responsibility job, she would yell at me. When I finally went to management about it all, I was told to learn to deal with it and she threatened to physically hurt me. So I quit. A month later, the HR manager called me up to check on me. He was told I took some mental days off, not that I had quit. He asked me why I had quit because he was not given any details since I gave my notice to my manager. I gave him all the reason. He told me my reason for quitting was no longer working there, and would I consider coming back? I did, with a raise. I was the only CSR for a few months, but I was doing okay. I recommended a good friend for the open position. Everything was fine for a bit, then the owner started his crap. He liked to target people, and when he would critique or make comments about them, he would use personal information about their private lives to make them cry. My coworker had a lot going on in her life, and he would get her crying all the time. The third CSR they hired would also cry. I was in the military, and they would cuss me out and call me names for being in the military. They would get upset when I would have to take time off for drill or 2 weeks of annual training. It got to the point that my manager would walk past my desk to hand my friend work for me and tell her to tell me in front of me to do something. Wouldn't even speak to me. Over time, even my friend joined in with the clique-ness of the popular kids club and wouldn't speak to me. When the owner made my coworkers cry at the one meeting and ran out, he looked at me and asked me if I was going to cry also. I had began looking for a new job that night. My son is also in and was deployed overseas at that time. I had to leave for annual training, and when I told my manager, I was told, "We don't adjust to the military adjusts to us." Then he goes on and says only f***ing losers are in the military. That was a Wednesday morning. That afternoon, I knocked on my manager's door, seen him roll his eyes on seeing me stand there, and then placed my notice on his desk. His whole demeanor changed. All of a sudden, he wanted to know how I was doing, if I was okay, what were my plans. Yeah, don't worry about me. I always have a backup plan. Then he starts asking about my kid. I told him, "Don't worry about my kid. You never cared before. Don't start acting like you do now." By 4 p.m., I was called in for an exit interview and told I had to have all my responsibilities done and my desk emptied out by 4:30 p.m. After I left, my friend warned them that me leaving was going to cost them, but they didn't want to hear it. My friend later told me that she and the other lady were working 16-plus-hour days, 6 days a week for about 6 months to stay on top of things because he wouldn't hire anyone else, and they still kept treating them poorly. Story 3. I worked at a hardware store for almost 6 months. This happened a few weeks into the pandemic in CA. Management was crap, pay was crap, and of course we were understaffed. One day this guy walks in holding an open box with a power tool in it, stares directly at me. I greet him. "Hello sir, welcome in." There is clearly 2 lines, 1 for each register. I take the next customer and he blows up yelling, "What the hell is my problem?" I saw him waiting. Yes, I did, but I greeted him. He only looked at me. Then as he was standing there, I assumed maybe he was waiting for a manager or sales associate, since he was just standing there at the entrance area. Like, maybe he just had a quick question about something, and they already chatted prior to me seeing him. Anyways, he's yelling at me, but I had already put in my 2 weeks. I only had 5 days of my 2-week notice left. He said something along the lines of, "This is bullcrap. You looked right at me." I said, "I greeted you when you walked in. I can't read your ducking mind. How do I know what you need if you don't ask me a question? There's 2 lines right there. You expect me to ignore them," he yelled back, saying I can't talk to him that way because he's a customer. He wants to speak to my manager now. I'm a crap employee, etc. I put my hands up and said, "You know what, duck this, I quit." Logged out the register and clocked out. At this point, my manager comes running up to me because he heard the shouting match, and he said, "Hey man, what happened?" I said, "Nothing, everything is fine, but duck this crap. I quit. I already logged out the register and clocked out. I think this guy just needs a return." I felt slightly bad for my manager because I could hear that the guy just transferred all his shouting and disdain for the customer service I provided to him to my manager, who, to be fair, was kind of a rude. Anyways, so I didn't feel that bad. I walked past the line of people, say bye to one of the cool stock guys in the back when I was grabbing my motorcycle helmet. I decided to exit through the main entrance just to get one more good look at this guy and see if he wanted to say anything else to me. Sadly, my motorcycle was parked behind the building because they wanted to reserve the parking spaces in the front of the store for customers and handicap parking. That would have been a legendary exit. Anyways, I walked past everybody in line and then past the guy, and he's just yelling at my supervisor that was trying to de-escalate the situation, it seemed. I said bye to the other employee working the other register. No one cheered me on or clapped like in the movies, but they did seem entertained, which I appreciated and gladly took credit for. I found it very funny and enjoyable for me. The ride home, I was giggling so much to myself in my helmet. Story 4. I am an admin for a medical commercial answering service. All the admins rotate on call for 2 WKs period, so you are on call about every 3 months, depending on what's going on. I was on call about a month after we moved into a new building. It was the holidays, and we started having some issues with our phone lines occasionally. We could get calls in, but having some trouble getting calls out was not a big deal unless we needed to relay something, so there was a mobile at the supervisor's desk to help. Of course, our phone company and system programs kept saying it was the other causing issue, so it was taking time getting it corrected. This overgrown, entitled child that has no business being a night supervisor was working the weekend. He was very animated about every issue he came across. He calls me freaking out on a Sunday because the lines were going busy again. So I immediately get on with the phone company, our rep for the system we use, and even called my friend who does it for us occasionally. I am juggling 3 people as the go-between, and he keeps blowing up my phone. I tell them to hold tight and answer his call. He immediately starts screaming at me, throwing a tantrum. I had not done anything yet. It had been 20 minutes and not busy, I checked. I tell him I'm on the phone at the moment, with everyone trying to help, so please stop calling or it will take longer. He starts screaming more, so I hang up on him. My tech tells me, "Hey, meet me at the office. I gotta test something." Cool, get there on the admin side. He does a test, finds exactly what is going, calls the phone company, tells so can be corrected. Of course, it's a Sunday, so they won't do anything till morning. Meanwhile, I was monitoring the floor by camera from the admin side, and the sup talking crap about he works so hard, he doesn't. And I'm not doing crap, but ignoring him. Walk on floors, he is cursing my name, and with a big ace smile, tell him what's going on. It will be corrected on Monday by the phone company, and I see they are not busy at all, so they should be good for the night, but call me if need help. I informed my boss about everything and about that supervisor. Came in late Monday to find out they pulled the recordings SN video of his call when he was screaming, and this fool was jumping up and down like a toddler. They called him back to speak to him about some things are out of our control, and no reason to act like that in front of staff. He told them fine, went back to work. I get there, walk out to say hi to the staff. As soon as I go back to my office, he said, "I don't need this from that Karen," grabbed his crap and walked out. Good riddance to bad blood. We still laugh about it and often share the video of him acting like a 2-year-old not getting his way. Story 5. My brother worked for a small business that was always booming on July 4th. He was also caring for our father with dementia, and he was getting bad fast. His manager, who most everyone knew was screwing the married regional lady manager, started changing his hours, despite him having an employment agreement because he was a caregiver. His stable schedule was suddenly in disarray. This created a rough situation at home with his disoriented father, now even more disoriented because he didn't remember from one day to another when his son would return with dinner. The manager refused his plea. The regional, of course, backed him up, and they gleefully discussed their July 4th plans together in front of everyone. All the employees required to work on the 4th. They scheduled my brother to work a 10-hour shift so they could go boating. It was the last straw. So after closing the store, July 3rd, My brother composed an email resigning immediately meant to be sent to all the company heads, exposing all the shady things going on at that store and detailing his mistreatment. He held back nothing, told them everything he knew. He sent it to everyone important at corporate except the manager and the regional. For the manager, he left a copy of the letter in his top desk drawer to find when he came in the next morning. The morning of July 4th, when brother knew the manager would be clocking in, he hit send. I don't know if the manager found the resignation before or after the crap hit the fan at corporate, but it sure ruined their July 4th. Turns out CEOs do check their emails on holiday. The regional resigned, and the company launched a quiet investigation on the manager. 3 months later, he was fired for documented wage theft and shady crap my brother wasn't aware of. Dad hung on for about 18 months. Brother basically took a flamethrower to his career, but he had no problems getting hired at a better company after Dad died. I'm proud of him. Stood up for Dad, himself, and ultimately, the company. Story 6. I was working for an IT company as a service coordinator when I got a call from my godmother that I wasn't to worry. But my brother was in the ER, and I had to get there right now. I told my boss my brother was in the ER, and he said go. I watched my baby brother pass under the compression machine, his gaze flickering from mine to my mother's as the light left his eyes. My best friend called my boss and said I'd be out for the remainder of the week as we waited for his organs to be harvested. It was a Thursday. On Monday, I went in and got back to work. We were arranging a funeral for that coming Saturday. Nobody mentioned anything. On Tuesday, the douche boss had the part-time bookkeeper fire me. She and I were both massively embarrassed about it, and I was on fire with grief and rage. He was firing me because I walked out on the job, so I could go watch my brother pass. You should know I knew my boss's family. I went to school with and was in an orchestra with all his younger siblings. I knew his mother, as she's a prolific iconography writer. So when he was off the phone, I went in and went full diasporic Ukrainian on him. I told him, name's changed. The next time you pull crap like this, I will tell your wife, I will tell Pyotr, I will tell Maria, I will tell Sonia, I will tell your mama. He got scared. He started to fluster. I pulled out my phone and started looking for his sister in my contacts. He tried to offer me my job back, but I told him I didn't work for stupid money escort pieces of crap who fire grieving employees, and wished him luck with the back end of the Kiram he dumped on me and ducked off. I saw him in the elevator one time, when I did a practicum in the same building, and I didn't acknowledge him on the elevator. He burst out, "You really do hate me." And I said to the other guy, "Did you fart?" The way we laughed at my old boss was great. Damn you, modest, and your fail army addiction. Story 7. My first sales gig in my early 20s was for Coca-Cola. I got assigned the actual ghetto in Queens. I survived a few shooting close calls in the first month. They paid me like $40K a year to do this BS job. I had to drive to 18 bodegas a day, in my own car. I got more parking tickets than my first paycheck covered. This was unavoidable if I didn't want to be fired for not going to all 18 places every day, truly. I was the only woman on the team, but given the least desirable territory. Fine, I'm new, but I'm tiny, and it was a truly dangerous area for most of the day. Every 2 weeks, the local NYPD station was in my list to stop by for soda orders. A cop pulled me aside a few months into this job and begged me to stop coming to that area by myself. Said this job would leave me dead and gave me their house to call moving forward. Said if my boss had a problem with, have him come and talk to him personally. A safe territory in Manhattan opens up. So I asked my boss to let me transfer, basically begged. He said no. I said, why? I'm scared. He said, I trained you, and that's under a different manager. A week later, the whole team comes in all hyped up before our 8 a.m. mandatory in-person team huddle. I said, what's with the excitement? One of them goes, oh, Victor. That's his real name. Duck you, Victor. Took the whole team to the Yankees game last night. I turn around, look at Victor, and go, I'm on your team? He said something line, yes, but you're a girl. I said, and? He goes, we thought you probably didn't even like baseball. I picked up my Coca-Cola laptop and GPS tracker. They used to track me like a UPS package. Dodging bullets in the ghetto, walked over to him with a straight face and held them out towards him. He instinctively just grabbed them, then goes, wait, what? These are yours, and tries to hand them back to me. At this PT4, other sales teams are in this room, and the regional boss as well, 50 PPP or so. I just go, duck you, Victor, I quit. Walked out and never talked to anyone except one dude who had my back consistently again. I ran into him a few years later. He said, I'm an urban legend at this PT and forever a badass to their team. Know your worth, and ladies, never ever tolerate this crap, ever. Story 8. Me and 13 other people are doing appliance delivery and install. We arrive at 5 a.m. to load the trucks and do our route. We are getting paid commission and we are killing it. Well, one day we get told that you guys are making too much money. You shouldn't be making more than the manager. So we are changing the commission, and you'll be getting paid less for the same work. Someone says, damn that, I'm not showing up tomorrow. Myself and 11 others decided the same thing. So the next day, we don't show up and have a BBQ at a park. At 8 a.m., the vice president called each and every one of us and told us, if you're not work by 10 a.m., you're fired. We all told him to blow it out his ass. 3 months later, I was getting my substances test for my new job, and I saw an employee from the old job, but he was a salesman. I told him I used to do deliveries for that company, but they pulled that on us, so we all walked out. His eyes got big and said, you were a part of that? Man, the entire company heard what y'all did. It crippled them for a month. They had to hire a third party to do deliveries and had to pay more than what y'all were being paid. Story 9. My best friend Orlando and I got a job moving furniture for the summer before our freshman year at college, as hired on with me as well. For reasons I'll make clear shortly, the company was owned by a wealthy African-American family and run by their 3 entitled sons. They would constantly remind us they were in charge and that we weren't hired to think. The work sucked and the hours were long, but it wasn't permanent. Each day we'd go out on a tractor trailer with one of the brothers. They would stand into the trailer, tell the 2 of us what piece of furniture he wanted us to bring him, and we'd go fetch it until the trailer was filled. About a month in, we were sent on a local job with the youngest of the brothers, who was also the worst of the 3. 2 hours into the day, he told us what he wanted next. From inside the house, it's really hot and we're both sweating, and as we turned away, we both heard him ask, don't like the whip being in the other hand, do you? Orlando, who is also African-American, mumbled, he ain't taking to me. I said, this is why no one can stand working for you a holes. He said that we had no choice, at least for the rest of the day. We lived in the Jersey Pine Barren. There are developments surrounded on all sides by woods with fire trails connecting them. What he didn't know was the house we were moving was on the last road and was butting up to the woods. About 5 miles straight through those woods was where we lived. As we walked into the house, Orlando looked at me and said, duck this guy, let's bolt. I agreed. We went in the front door, down the stairs, straight out the back door to the Fair Trail and walked home. I have no idea how long that asshat waited for us to come back with the furniture before he realized he was on his own. Pretty sure we spent the rest of the day surf fishing. Story 10. I worked at a prominent thrift store here in Canada. After 2 years, I was trained in all departments: cash, sorting tables, and donation drop-off. At this time, I was working at the donation drop-off, which includes building the huge carts and moving them to the back. I was transferred from a different store, one that had better ratings and less complaints from staff. I constantly got in trouble for following safety rules and company guidelines. Our donation drop-off had stairs, which is insane. Imagine in the winter, carrying 80 boxes up and down ice stairs. And we were always busy. This day I didn't have a partner, so I wasn't getting a break. Mind you, I'm 5'2", and I've been running boxes of books up these stairs, carrying in furniture, building carts 2 feet taller than me, and then pulling the cart across the back of the warehouse, which you weren't supposed to do alone, but I had no choice. After many hours, one of the cashiers came back to help me. She watched the door while I rearranged some carts in the back so there was more space. By law, we have to wear steel-toed shoes and a safety vest. There wasn't anything for her, the extra was missing, so I made her wear my vest. The manager came back and yelled at me for the lack of vest, didn't care I mentioned there weren't extra. I then overheard her tell someone that she purposely scheduled me to be alone on this day, during our busiest time of year. I went on my break and never went back. They were mass calling my phone and everything. I heard from another employee they were stressed that I was gone, and they changed their safety regulations, including there always had to be at least 2 people at the donation drop-off at all times. Story 11. I once quit right in front of a customer. I was on a service counter, but the store manager was bullying me. BC, I reminded her of her daughter who hated her. Gee, wonder why. She would find me just to lecture me like I was a child, and constantly tried to take over my position to put me on the front register so she could handle my counter instead. I had earned that service position after years of wanting it before she came to the store, but she was desperate to have control, so she refused to actually let me do it. I had actually already gotten a second job and was only hanging in there for the sake of some coworkers who didn't want me to leave. So when she had me scheduled for an 8-hour shift of doing front register while she did my counter, which she is only half trained in BTW and could not work on orders between customers like I could, I simply told her I wasn't going to do it, went back to get my bag, and walked out right in front of the customer, leaving her without a cashier or anybody on that counter on a Saturday morning before Thanksgiving. Bye, Karen. The customer was like, oh, are you guys gonna fight? But I just said, I don't really need this job, and left while he stared in disbelief. Poor dude. didn't expect to be the straw that broke the camel's back that morning. A couple years later, I ran into a former coworker who told me that store manager was fired for too many complaints about my situation and others, and that I was welcome to return, but the company doesn't pay as much as other jobs I found since then, so I never went back. Story 12. This wasn't on the spot, but when I worked at Jimmy John's, we had one driver who was really hardworking and never called in, very reliable, and well-liked. He had to get his tonsils taken out and so told the GM way in advance and took a week off work to recover. Well, the day he was supposed to come back, he was still in too much pain. So he called the GM and was super apologetic, and the GM didn't mind. He knew the guy's reputation and just wanted him to feel better. The area manager, however, proceeded to call the driver a mangina, all disgusted, and was pretty mad at the GM for not writing him up. While the GM calmly defended his driver, I just went into the back and took a piece of printer paper, drew a picture of a fox, literally just because that's the animal I'd been fixated on drawing well lately, and wrote, "This is a picture of a fox. This is also my 2 weeks notice, love my name," and left it on the desk for the GM to find. He thought it was hilarious and wished me the best. I'd been there for a long time and had a new and better job lined up very quickly. And I heard from my buddies still there that when the area manager found out I'd quit because of his insulting a good employee, he was rather ashamed of himself and actually started working on himself to be a better person. Story 13. Back in high school, my best friend and I worked at a Hardee's. The owner was a real idiot. He charged my friend 19 cents for putting an extra pickle on a burger when the pickles were small. I got a write-up for coming back from break too early when a busload of kids showed up. We decided to quit on the next payday. The night before, we called everyone who worked there and told them not to answer the phone unless they wanted to work. On payday, we walked in to start our night shift, got our paychecks, made sure the day shift had left, then handed in our uniforms and quit. The owner and his son, also a real a-hole, worked the closing shift. It was glorious. Story 14. I started a job and there was a woman there that I was supposed to learn some of my role from. She wasn't incredibly helpful. I learned I had to be real specific on my asks to get the right answers. She was better than the other person I had to work with that would just skip huge amounts of information one would need. And I should have taken this as a warning, but I was in my 20s and still learning about red flags at work. But the rest of the department talked badly about her because she didn't want to socialize. They also made fun of her wanting to work in Italy. I had been there for about a month when she left on her vacation to Italy. I was her backup, and she left me with nothing to go on, which sucked. The day she was supposed to return, she sent an email with her resignation as she had moved to Italy for good, had got a job there and was never coming back. The office exploded. People couldn't believe it. And how dare she, and look at the mess she left behind. And even though I had been impacted, I think she was awesome. And I hope she is still living her best life in Italy. That job sucked, and the leadership was crap. And I learned a lot of things to look for on if a job would be a mess or not. Story 15. Pastry chef handed out peaches. One of my first restaurants, fancy place that had been around a while. New GM was talking to regulars, and they were there on their anniversary, wanting to impress them as the new GM. He wanted to surprise them with the dessert they had on their first anniversary, strawberry shortcake. He went to the pastry chef and demanded that he make a special dessert for these people. The PC just stared at him. Couple problems if you didn't know. It wasn't strawberry season, we didn't have shortcake, and it was the middle of dinner service. GM didn't care, told PC to go to the store and buy it and make it happen. Again, fancy place, Safeway shortcake isn't going to be close to our standards, and just know. The argument got louder and louder. Finally, the GM said, "Do it or you're fired." But what about the peaches, you asked? Well, the actual dessert that night was a peach dish, and he had a giant bowl of them prepped. So he picked it up, walked out into the restaurant, and started offering peaches like he was a peanut vendor at a baseball game. Peaches, who wants peaches? And he would throw them at people, windows, the bar, the GM a few times. It was the most glorious rage quit I've ever witnessed. There were peaches stuck to walls for weeks that we missed in his honor. That GM didn't last long either. Story 16. Worked at a nonprofit for 13 years as director of sales, producing trade shows. Things really started going downhill in 2018 when they fired my boss, VP, and second longest employee at the company, and the operations director. They replaced them with a person with no experience and couldn't find her way out of a paper bag. 20 PPL quit within that year after she was brought on as a GM. I decided to go out with a bang. Wrote my resignation letter, called the GM and the executive director out. Told them they were both incompetent and didn't belong in charge. Seed the entire staff, former employees, some of my customers, and the bods, since they hadn't been honest with the bods about the turnover rate. Went in that morning, set the email to auto-send at noon, and walked out at 11:45 a.m. It was the thing of legends when that email hit. My staff clued me into the chaos that ensued, since I did let them know ahead of time what I planned. GM was crying. The executive director said I'd never work in the industry again. Had a job with the competition a month later. Took the bods another year to sack the executive director. They lost the trade shows due to the incompetence of the GM. They did keep her on for another year, but she was also sacked. I still work in the industry. They do not. Story 17. 14 years old, working alone for 50 cents per hour back in 1972 on a blistery cold winter evening at a corner store. Some guy came in looking to borrow a shovel to get his car out of a snowbank. I said I didn't know if there was a shovel outside the store or not, but there might be one on the porch. Store was part of owner's house, and we only sold candy, gifts, and some groceries. The guy was angry but left, and I was busy with other customers. Next day, the owner asked me where his shovel was, and I told the owner the story, not knowing it was missing. I guess the angry guy stole the shovel. The owner took $4 out of my pay for the shovel. 8 hours work for me. I spent the next few weeks taking nickels and dimes out of the penny candy can. Can was used, so not every candy sale was rung up until a few dollars were collected. I stopped once I got my $4 back. A few months go by and I went on a trip with my parents, and after the trip, I did not return to the job. Owner called me and offered me 70 cents an hour to come back. I said no thanks. I was very low-key back then. Story 18. Here's one I missed due to a sick day. There was this one guy who had a mouth on him and used it frequently. Sometimes he'd be nice and chat with me as we worked near each other. Sometimes he'd be grouchy, and sometimes he'd badmouth management all day. One day he tried starting crap with the supervisor and got sent home to cool off. In the parking lot, he bumped fenders with a car coming by as he backed out. Driver got out and very nicely asked for his info. Just a formality. Well, this kid got all bent out of shape and refused to come out of the car and start spouting some bullcrap and started getting heated. Other driver insisted. So the kid slowly backed up and made contact with the guy. Driver went inside and had a chat with the boss. Turned out it was the owner there for a visit. Super went out and again told the kid to go home until things could be sorted out. An hour later, the kid returned and walked in like nothing and went back to his work. Boss saw and came over. Loud words were exchanged and the guy was canned and trespassed. Story 19. I took a job I knew I was going to hate, just to hold me over until I found something else. I was alone in the office most of the time, and the office manager didn't go over little things with me. One day I was sitting at my desk sorting through the mail, and when I got to something addressed personally to the doctor I worked for, I slid open the envelope and I made a little stack to put on her desk. Then I pulled charts to go with reports that were mailed or faxed over. I put the stack of charts on her desk and the personal mail on her desk. When she came in and saw the envelopes were open, she came out of her office and yelled at me, like I'm a child. I told her that was how I did it at other jobs and no one told me differently there. She went on and accused me of reading her bank statements. Then she left to go to the hospital. She called while she was in the road to keep yelling at me. I got mad and yelled back. I said, I made a mistake. I understand. There's no reason to keep bringing it up. Story 20. I was named the scapegoat for my manager disappearing during a warranty sort and screwing another coworker on company time. I had already interviewed with another division of the company and knew I was getting no raise from where I was, as new division offered me the same salary when they offered me the job. I was still responsible for telling my manager I was quitting and taking a new job. The day they rolled out the, you have to use all your vacation by the end of the year, was the same day they gave us salary letters for the next year. As part of a relocation package with my company, I got several days additional vacation for house hunting. So my manager goes to hand me my letter with, I'm sorry, but you just didn't do enough to earn a raise this year. I looked him straight in the eye, took my letter, opened his office door and said, you know what, duck you? I quit. My last day is right now. I packed my crap and left. The best part was that I was the only one who had specific software to open specific documents for customers. They had an audit the next week and had several major findings as a result. Story 21. In 1998, I was working in an engineering company. I had to travel to job sites to verify the work done. I was designing movie theaters around the country. I went to Maryland, and I just happened to be a few weeks pregnant. I had to fly, and it made me absolutely sick. But I did my job. I get back from the visit and have a sit-down meeting with other engineer. His name is Bill. Bill is this born-again Christian that was a 30-year-old virgin. He liked bringing his guns into work. He also loved trains. He asked if I did his part of the job, and while I was trying to explain I haven't been feeling well and couldn't do his part, he leaps across the table as he is pushing off the chair. He is beating me. I have witnesses, the other people in the office helped me up, and Bill ran out. My bosses gave us both a write-up for fighting. I was shocked he went after me. Also, I went for the baby's first ultrasound and found no heartbeat. I blame Bill for this. I came back after a few days and quit. I couldn't believe they had no sympathy for me for losing my baby. Story 22. Roughly 10 years back, I had a colleague who was working his way up in the company. He was advancing, and they had an open position for a manager that popped up. Randomly, they hired this unqualified manager and interviewed her after hours. It came a shock to us all. but she had a connection to the co-owner of the company. She ended up being my colleague's boss and would always be watching over his shoulder and micromanaging everything. It irritated him so much. I don't know much about what happened because they were in a separate room in the building, but one day I saw his manager outside of the co-owner's room. She didn't even bother going into his office and closing the door, and was halfway out in the hallway talking smack about him. My colleague heard it, came around the corner and told her, "Grow the duck up." They told him to take the afternoon off and cool down. The next thing I see is him packing his entire desk up and wearing Viking helmet with gold braids coming down it out of the building with bags of stuff. And he left forever. Story 23. I guess this is dramatic, but at my last job I made a mistake. Wasn't a big one, but I accidentally broke the crown on a watch. Of course that sucks, but it was still fixable. I had a small moment of panic, but again, I fixed it. But my boss thought my reaction wasn't okay, so she sent me home for the day and told me to work on myself and used a personal situation against me. Needless to say, I told her to stick that comment up her ass, since she isn't in the right to say something like that to me, and that she doesn't need to worry about me since I won't be coming back anyway. Got an email that I wasn't allowed to come into the store because I was unstable due to my personal situation. Mind you, I was going through a divorce at that moment, and I only stayed home one day, other than that I went to work like nothing was going on. But hey, I was unstable. Story 24, late 90s. Lady in the Winter was a temp from Kelly Temp Agency. I was training her. She was doing fine. She brought in pictures from home to help her relax. Fine with me. I forget the time frame of how long she was there. She left at lunch after a few weeks and never came back. She left her yellow winter jacket. This was Scottsdale, so it wasn't too cold. Pictures and even her purse. My boss called the temp agency. They finally heard from her the next day. We waited a few days to see if she would come back because it wouldn't involve a lot of training. Temp agency told us a few days later she wasn't coming back. We put her items in a box and the agency came and picked them up. It wasn't dramatic, but it was strange. Had another lady in the summer want to leave her shoes in a trash can overnight at her desk and walk out barefoot in Scottsdale, hot pavement. It was her first day. I told the boss. She immediately called Kelly and told her this one isn't working. Again, not dramatic, just strange. Both were in the same year, story 25. This isn't dramatic, but the silence was stunning to all of us. Two important people in my office literally quit the same day, one right after the other. Didn't say anything to anyone, just walked out the door and never came back. When we were getting ready to all clock out and go home, we wondered where both of them had gone. Eventually, we pieced things together that they had both quit because they had left their items in the desk and keys on top. Laptop, phone, everything just left on the desk. None of them said anything to anyone. They just took off. My office genuinely has a very healthy work culture. And the company itself sucks, but we as a team are pretty solid. It really hit us hard because they were really good people and we enjoyed having them around. It just sucked that they both left at the same time without even saying goodbye. People have their reasons, and I get it, but at the same time, it would have been cool to wish them well in person instead of finding out collectively once we all put the pieces together. Story 26. Used to supervise in a government call center. One guy got fired after always being late. Never really bothered me much. I was the early shift super, so I always knew to have coverage, or I'd jump in and answer if things got busy. But the other dopey would always complain because she hated taking calls. I know buses in our area suck, so I didn't want to make a big deal. Anyways, he came back from the HR meeting to grab his crap and loudly proclaimed I was the chilliest boss he's ever had, and he's sorry about this. Then he loudly said everyone else can get ducked and threw some really old egg salad and milk he found in the office fridge at the cubicle walls around the other supervisor's desk. The stench was unreal. Eventually, enough of a stink was made, and we were sent home while they removed the offending walls. Story 27. I worked the front desk of a big city ER. I was a floater, meaning I also had worked in the clinics and urgent care. The woman who oversaw the ER clerk's schedule didn't like me. The last straw was being scheduled 12-hour overnight shifts every other day. I turned in my notice. My last shift ended at 7 a.m. Day shift came in and a family came up to the desk. I had already signed out, and day shift woman said she wasn't ready to start. Family was there because their son had been killed. Shooting victims are first registered as a SAM doe in case the shooter comes on for retaliation. They tell me their son's name and I don't see it. Before I can say, let me get the patient rep, they go berserk and start screaming. I press the silent alarm button for security, and one coworker who was just a sourpuss comes running up to see what's going on. I just got up, grabbed my bag, and clocked out story 28. When I was working a huge coal gas field, there was 4 companies doing the work. One day, the foreman came to me and told me to walk my excavator over to the next right-of-way to the west, and then go north until I got off the site. They need help. I figured they had a dozer stuck, but no. As I approached, there were lots of suits, cops, and workers standing around a burnt excavator. They asked me to drag it to the side and start digging where it was sitting. I did and found a smashed up DCN sitting on top of 2 self-propelled fusion units. An operator for that company had got let go on Friday, got drunk and slipped back out there and went berserk before he left the state. He had dug a big hole, used the hoe to throw in 2 fusion units and then rolled in the dozer, smashed them up, then buried them, and parked the hoe on top and set fire to it. I never heard if they caught him or not. Story 29. I clock in, I go to the service area to load a 2-horsepower pump motor into the work truck because I just pieced it back together the day before. And I've been working for this pool company for about 6 months, for the past 2 months. I've been smoking weed with my boss in the work truck, knowing the big boss would be pissed at both of us. I overhear the big boss and the guy over me walking in, talking about marijuana or whatever. So when the big boss leaves and the guy over me hovers over near my station as I'm putting the back of the motor on, he starts the conversation with, "Man, you know I hate snitching on you." I just immediately look at him. I even clock out and just leave. I don't tolerate snitching by any standpoint, and I'm not going to take the blame for something that wasn't even my idea and continue working there. GTFO Story 30. I was working for CSX Railroad Company, brought the train home from Spartanburg, South Carolina to Irwin, Tennessee, pulled it up to the signal, dumped the air, which put the train in emergency braking on a mile-long train, and got off into the taxi and left it sitting there. It basically stopped all traffic in or out of the yard for about 2 hours before they could get a crew on it to clear the main line. It's not a big deal unless you're in charge of running trains, and for that bunch of people who have been gits to everyone in the past, it gave me a sense of getting even for all the train crews. That one night, Story 31. Back in the late 90s, I was a CNA in a nursing home. We had this one RN who was a bit of a pain anyway. One Saturday afternoon, she came into work in a bad mood because she had to leave home before a movie on TV she got interested in was finished. Someone said or did something that set her off, and she stomped out and quit right there on the spot. Not only did she abandon the residents she was supposed to take care of, but I thought it was pretty stupid to be in a bad mood and quit your job over a movie. And while the movie probably wasn't really the main issue, it was also dumb because by the time she got home, the movie would have been over and she wouldn't be able to recapture that relaxed feeling that caused her to not want to leave home in the first place. Story 32. Was working in a contract dining account at a college early in my career as the assistant manager. It was the weekend and I was the pick. Generally, the weekend crew was the B team. Mac and cheese were on the menu that night. Nothing unusual about that. It came out onto the serving line, topped with diced tomatoes. I'm like, WTF is up with this? I asked the cook, first cook, no chef on duty. What's up with the tomatoes on the mac and cheese? She told me. That's how I make it. Clearly offended by my question. I ask her to show me the recipe. She absolutely flips her lid. Who am I to question her cooking skills? She grew up on that mac and cheese. Did I taste it? Just a complete tirade that ends with her slamming her chef hat on the table, shouting, "I quit." It was like a movie, almost comical. She never ended up showing me the recipe. Story 33. My supervisor reprimanded me based on information received from another staff member who hated me. The lack of support had been there before, but this was clearly just to humiliate me. I clearly explained my position and that the conversation was ridiculous. She said we'd circle around after my 2 days off. Yeah, right. About 30 minutes before the end of the day, I put Post-its on my pending work. I dealt with property management, so I felt the residents shouldn't suffer my quick departure. I stuffed my few personal items in my lunchbox, pulled pics out of company frames, and just walked out. Mailed my property keys back the next day. I got exactly one call that I did not answer. I have a feeling they didn't miss me. Story 34. It wasn't publicly dramatic, but one of my team quit under rather strange circumstances. She made a right royal mess of an accounting situation with minor errors and calculations that ballooned into a huge cumulative discrepancy. When I sat her down to reprimand her, she was very unhappy and went to my boss to complain. Turned out she was so maths incompetent that she couldn't count to 60, and so her record keeping was all screwed up. My boss drew kindergarten-style pictures on the whiteboard to show her what should have been done, and she complained to everyone that I didn't draw pictures to describe her job to her. She put in for a transfer to another team, and I washed my hands of her. Her new work scope was different enough that, cross my fingers, I hoped she would not screw that up too. Her new boss advised her to resign a year later. Story 35. So many stories. Here's an earlier one. I had a coworker who'd been hired with a lot of one kind of experience, but they switched him to do a totally different kind of work without much support. One Friday, locked his computer in his desk and left. Monday morning, we came into the office to find an email from him stating that Friday had been his last day, and we all knew he didn't do anything anyway. He did not return any calls. While my bosses tried to reach him, I had to find one of the janitorial staff to get a master key to unlock his desk to retrieve the laptop. Then, when we replicated all of his personal files from network backup my laptop, It turned out he didn't actually have any files on any of the work he was supposed to do. I sometimes wonder what happened to him after that. He really burned that bridge thoroughly. Story 36. I was let go because my role had become redundant. A coworker and I were called to an unscheduled meeting, and I said, if HR is in there, we're getting fired. I just had that vibe. And yep, HR was sitting there with a clean pad of paper and a pen. We were offered a 90-day window. I got up and said, I'm going to ducking barf. I'm going home sick. We'll discuss this on Monday. Later, I found through trusted sources that he was told to get rid of me as part of his promotion to becoming my manager. Story 37. Worked at a Little Caesars. I ended up quitting, which wasn't the dramatic part. They posted something on Facebook about their great deals. I then posted back about their crafty weirdo managers. They asked to speak with me, in which I did. Told them they had an older male manager that tried to schedule young females to close with him. He was texting me trying to get favors. Found out later 5 additional females came forward as well after hearing about the fact that I came forward. Glad he was fired. He was a weirdo. Before knowing him as my manager, he was dating my friend. Her mom allowed it. He was the reason I quit. No way was I ending up alone with that guy. Story 38. I worked in a DRS office. Our doctor quit. Our manager quit. They brought in a new group of people who were way younger than me, and I guess they thought my salary was too high. They fired me. Our front desk girl was very tall and big-boned, around my age, and she was mad as hell when I got fired. She went in the next day, not in her scrubs, walked into the new people's office and loudly said, I just came in this morning to tell you Koreans I quit. She told them to shove their write-ups. Yes, she got some too. Right up their mother's ass. She walked out. They called the police on her and changed the locks. She scared the crap out of these new little girls. Story 39. I worked at a call center for a bank years ago. The job was insane. Call after call were ending. One day, this quiet little coworker, I had picked up his computer monitor. This was about 15 years ago, so the big heavy one, and crashed it with all his might on the floor. Pieces flew all over the room of about 50 people. Complete silence. He just grabbed his stuff and walked out. We all just sat there in silence with our mouths open, like TF just happened, completely ignoring the people on the phones. Then the bosses came out and yelled at us to go back to work. Story 40. I worked in a government position where we had contact workers as clerical and support staff, so we had no say in who they sent. This one woman was an issue from the start. She wouldn't complete the tasks she was supposed to, but would claim she hadn't been trained on how to do them, although we had 3 separate people trying her on the tasks. We asked her to take minutes of a meeting, and she wore mirrored sunglasses for the entire meeting. More missed deadline. Then I was in the restroom, in a stall, and she comes in with another contractor and says, Puzzle is such a Karen, and proceeds to say that I was forcing her to do things she didn't want to do. I called the vendor again, and she was gone in 15 minutes. Story 41. I went away for a long weekend at a job in Oklahoma. They decided I needed to move my office from a central location overseeing 3 properties to the one property that was filled with whiners. I said sure, went home that night, packed my car with everything I could. Next morning, went into security office, said, nice working with you, Steve. Here's my keys and company card. Drove 18 hours back to where my family was in Pennsylvania. Story 42. 20 plus years ago, I was the manager at a Western Sizzlin'. I walked by the dish pit and noticed the dishes starting to pile up and the dishwasher, Kyle, nowhere in sight. I start looking for him and I can't find him anywhere. I go in the bathroom and the stall is locked, but nobody is in there. So I slid under the stall and unlocked it and found his uniform on the back of the toilet. This was a small town, but I never saw that kid again. Pretty sure he was beamed back up to the mothership. Story 43. I work for a state government agency. One day I received an inter-office email sent to the entire district office, the agency executives and the governor. A few news agencies were also copied. A disgruntled co-worker sent this long manifesto to everyone he could think of. It was a well-written and comprehensive list of all his grievances and cited examples of alleged hostile work environment. There were also alleged violations of FMLA rules and more. This was an epic email showing someone not only burning his bridge, but nuking it. There was no official response, and other than water cooler talk, no response at all. I still reread this email, off and on, and have read it to others as it is that epic. Story 44. They had already changed the weekly published schedule mutable times and then told me that the day I missed because of that was considered a no-call, no-show. Because I didn't recheck on my day off, 3 was a termination. Then we got a major snowstorm. That area of the town was plowed. Mine was not. Every route between my house and there had a steep hill, not on the plow routes. I called in 4 hours before I'm supposed to start. They say it will still be considered a no-call, no-show because they are not taking any call-offs that day. I tell them, well, this will be my second one, and I've decided not to come in tomorrow or the next day now either, so I'll just consider myself terminated. Story 45. I was in a hard-to-fill and keep job, child protection, And we had not one but two attorneys go through the whole process and get starting dates and then never show up or call. They were coming from out of town, and a couple of the attorneys drove one of them around, looking at apartments and other places of interest, and she never messaged them either. They hired a paralegal who only worked a few days, then called in sick several days while updating her Facebook with all the places she was going out to. Someone went to her home and knocked and asked if she was coming back. No. Story 46. Not quitting, she was fired. We worked in an office, and she was a temp. While she was charming, she approached many people about borrowing dollar, like $10 or gave her $5. Then, several days later, I asked her for it. Would you believe she looked me in the eye and said, "What Cha gonna do?" Well, that was enough. I told my boss, and he terminated her contract. We think she was doing substances. She went running down the aisle, screeching, "Oh!" That was the end of that. Story 47. Worked at an aerospace shop that is world-renowned till they started doing illegitimate work. Boss threw me under the bus, got a 2-week suspension for just being a lead because he didn't want to take the fall. A couple of months went by, I got a call from a bigger company to come work for them. Now, I was the top of the workers there. My number 2 went on vacation, so my boss automatically thought I'd be there to help him out. I took 2 weeks off and came on a Friday morning to personally tell him I quit. The look on his face was priceless. Story 48. I was super burnt out at a dispatch job I had. The workload kept increasing beyond manageable limits. I had a meeting with 3 managers about everything, and they knew someone was going to break, just didn't know who. They assured me plans were in place to help, but it would be a month before any changes would be seen. A few days later, things were really busy and awful. A few hours into my shift, I snapped. I closed my laptop and went to take a nap. Story 49. Happened to a grocery store a few towns over. Manager was an absolute douche. Grocery clerk was late a few times because of personal reasons that were very understandable, and he was an overnight clerk. So he wouldn't hear about it till the morning when the manager came in and saw the punches. Anyway, dude comes downstairs and he's just finishing loading the soda aisle, and manager goes off on him. He says, "Duck you in this job," and takes 2 box cutters out and walks down the aisle with arms stretched, cutting them all open as he walks out. Massive mess. Story 50. I was working for a big sports event, one of the biggest in my region. I was 7 months pregnant at the time, and my boss, who's known for being a tyrant, had spent the previous months basically yelling at every one of us for no reason. Like, we employees were his punching balls, basically. One day, 1 week before the event took place, he yelled at me so hard that my baby kicked from inside the womb. Less than 2 hours later, my OB had sent me my sick leave notice, and I never went back, never saw this guy again. Story 51. Our whole team was domino quitting, and the last one took in her computer, monitors, and the rest of her equipment, left it on her cubicle desk, taped her badge and a note to it, and said basically she resigned effective immediately. What I wouldn't have paid to see our boss's face when she realized there was absolutely no one left in our department. We carried her for a year and change, and she still couldn't figure out the job. This is an industry that usually needs 2 weeks to help knowledge transferring, but even I didn't do 2 weeks. So proud of her. Story 52. I managed a pizza shop for a few years. I had to fire a waitress at the end of her shift. After she left, she returned and took her free staff pizza and threw it at the front door. Story 53. I always joked that I would dramatically quit when wham, "Wake me up before you go" played. One day it played all coworkers' eyes on me as I left the line, took my apron off, and danced like it was an 80s movie, out the kitchen through the dining room. And right as I hit the door, double birds backed right out went home. Boss thought it was hilarious that I followed through. Frankly, I didn't think I would do it, but I had joked so much about it and everyone was watching, I felt like I had to. Story 54. Not really dramatic, but my friend and I were both working for this strange company that to this day I don't know what they were all about. She wasn't happy there, but was pregnant and needed to stay to keep the insurance while she had the baby. She actually had the baby a month early, so she called out that morning telling them she had gone into labor before any scheduled leave. She was put on maternity leave and then just didn't go back. She quit and later told me she took a little extra time off before getting a new job. Story 55. I quit a really stressful job that was destroying my physical and mental health by going on holiday. Spent 10 days in the Caribbean, was so happy and relaxed that I never went back. When the inevitable call came in asking where I was, I said, "You know what, I feel so good right now. I'm not ruining that by coming into work." Texted them my notice after the call and said I wouldn't be working it. Story 56. I was 16 and working at McDonald's. The manager told me that I needed to go clean McDonald land even though he had assigned someone else to do it. That person didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. I always did it. So I argued and he told me to do it or I was fired. So I took off my uniform, top and bottom, threw it at him, and walked out to my car in my bra and underwear. We weren't closed yet. Story 57. Before my time, but a guy I know had a pretty good one. I forget the details, but remember he flipped off the cameras. What made it epic though was a dude had went into the freezer, fell and hit his head, and was passed out in the floor, partially hanging out the freezer. No one had noticed, so as he's walking out, he flips the camera off and tells them, "Oh yeah, is in the freezer." Story 58. Our plant safety/environmental manager at the weekly Friday afternoon management meeting announced to our plant management team he won't cover an issue on Monday because today was his last day, out of the blue. We were all shocked, but not as shocked as when I was tasked to cover his duties and realized he took all the federal and state permits for operating the plant. He refused to return calls or assist in any way. None of us saw it coming. Maybe he hated the boss, but if so, he only hurt his coworkers. Story 59. I went out one night and got extremely drunk, woke up super late for work the next day, and decided I didn't give a crap about the job and never went back. They called me several times and I just never answered. I was young and not in a great place in life at that point. TBF, they'd started changing my role drastically to a job I'd not agreed to when I accepted the position. That company is now out of business. Story 60. I was thrown under the bus at work when I was 25. It was a retail store and close to Christmas. I had a dental assistant job lined up in January, but hadn't given my notice yet. To make a Karen client happy, they reprimanded me for something that wasn't my fault in front of her. They then told me to take my break. I took my coat and left. They were screwed and called me about 100x, said I abandoned my job, told them to shove it. What made you walk out of a job on the spot? Story 1. Hey boss, I worked hard for that 6-month period you told me to work extra hard in. Remember your promise to review my pay after that period if things went well? I didn't promise that. I would never have promised that. Okay, I got up, logged onto LinkedIn, and set my status to looking for work in full view of my manager. Got a call that afternoon and a new job the next week. Also got a sweet month of garden leave out of it too. Story 2. I applied to a job as a cafe all-rounder. Found out at the interview that the cafe didn't yet exist and I would be setting one up for inside a larger business. Advertised salary was $24.5K for part-time hours, so seemed fair for the amount of work that would entail. First, they offered me the job, but cited my lack of experience and said they could only pay me $12 an hour at first, but that it would go up after 3 months once I proved myself. I was desperate, so I took it. I said I wanted to work 3 or 4 days a week, or around 25 and 30 hours at most, as I have a small business of my own. They immediately put me on 6 days and asked me to work for 14 days straight for my first 2 weeks while they found a second person. Not great. They were also extremely excited that I could drive. Turns out they wanted me to do Costco run, in my own time, with my own car. And no, I don't have business insurance. They wanted me to pay for shopping from my own bank account and pay myself back from cash in the till, even though we took very little cash. So it would take me all week to pay myself back, by which time we need another shop. I couldn't claim back fuel or use my paid roster time to complete this task. My boss was a guy who'd been brought on to fix the business. You see, there had been bankruptcy, repo men, debt collectors, an incident. They'd had the gas shut off the day I started for not paying. Apparently there had been a cafe previously, but the lady running it ended up taking them to court for not paying her, not providing stock, and treating her like crap. I found out because the customers warned me. I would send along messages full of problems with equipment, things we needed to do to be legally compliant, issues I was having, and questions I had since there was no one to report to. The boss would promise to get back to me and never would. He said he was too busy, and I was low priority to him. Lovely. I found out halfway through an 11-hour shift where I was cleaning, scrubbing, and organized that they weren't planning on paying me for that part. Thought they shouldn't only pay for service hours. They also informed me I was expected to come in half an hour early to open, unpaid of course. They said, "This is your baby," to excuse the extra hours they wanted from me unpaid. The shifts themselves were boring. Very few customers. The business was located in an industrial park, and I was on the top floor of a gym, so no way to attract foot traffic. Only parents of the kids taking classes there would even know I was there if they happened to venture upstairs. My training was online food safety courses, to be completed in my own time. I was also asked to pay for the certificates out of pocket and send them over when I finished them. I put 8 hours into 2 of the 3 of these before I gave up. I found out that they weren't planning on paying me for the first time for 10 weeks. Keep in mind that I was driving there, expected to drive to a Costco and pay out of pocket for the stock, as well as to the local shop multiple nights a week since we didn't have a big enough fridge to store more than a couple of bottles of milk. It was costing me more than I had, and I had been without work for months before this, so I was living off my overdraft. I told my boss that this wasn't going to work for me, and that I would probably have to leave if he couldn't forward me some of my pay in advance or work an alternative payment schedule out. He told me to kick rocks, basically, and told me my contract meant I had to give 3 months notice. I said, I'm pretty sure I remember reading it, and it said 2 weeks, 3 months would be absurd. Turns out me, my dad, and my boyfriend all somehow misread it. 12 ducking weeks notice. I'm still not convinced they didn't retroactively change it after I digitally signed. So one day I sent the boss a friendly message saying I needed a Costco run, but I wouldn't be able to do it myself, citing previously stated reasons. I put emphasis on the fact I didn't have the correct car insurance for business use. He basically ignored everything I had to say, said I needed to be more independent and deal with everything related to the cafe myself, with no company card or anything, and ordered me to go to Costco and buy everything I needed myself. He took the piss out of my concerns and said, "You don't need special insurance." That finally broke me. I sent him an HR messages saying I quit effectively immediately, as I draw the line at being ordered to break the law. He in turn told me that he denies the allegations I am breaking contract, and they are going to speak to their solicitors about suing me for slander and lost revenue, despite the cafe not being in profit or even close. They didn't pay me, of course, and I never heard from their solicitors. Story 3. This will probably be a long one. In the care support sector, so none of this will surprise people that have worked there. Worked as a mental health support worker for nearly a decade. Small local company that grew to owning 6 properties and where homes for service users, patients, whatever you want to call them. Company was bought out by a national-sized company called CareTech, and things immediately just started turning to crap. The first thing they did was remove all bonuses, including the Christmas bonus they promised they wouldn't touch. They literally broke one of the main promises the first week they took over. Completely stopped pay rises until the minimum wage caught up. And then when it overtook what we're getting paid, we got a letter congratulating us on our pay rise that they were forced to give us to keep everything legal. They drove out all the experienced staff. They gave the company any pushback at all. Then, when literally nobody would take the job due to paying minimum wage, they then advertised the same job but at a higher wage than everyone else in the company. We really kicked off over that. Refused to pay for the Christmas party. That was mostly for the service users, but staff attended also. It was good fun that the service users used to really enjoy and had become a tradition every year. They later expressed their disappointment in the staff for not paying for the Christmas party out of their own money, when most of us were working long hours for crap pay and could barely afford to live. They refused to pay for the Christmas party because they couldn't afford it, apparently, while bragging on their website front page about the millions of pounds of profit they made. I actually took a screenshot of their website and replied to their email that told us they couldn't afford it. The website was changed within the week. They then decided we were going to get a Christmas bonus for all our hard work. It was $500 and they told us to use the money to have a meal with staff members and patients. My exact words were, "Tell management that I, quote, stick it up your arse." I went from being the new guy in a large pool of staff to one of the more experienced staff in a smaller pool quite quickly. I went from watching people that had done the job for years advocating for service users to quickly being the one doing all the arguing and advocating as everyone else has ducked off to get other jobs. I was constantly pushing back against the company as they always get sex on about patient-led care. That was a massive part of the training and the advertising of the whole company, but not a single decision the company made was led by the well-being and care of their patients. It was led by money and no other reason. Because of this, I phoned care standards multiple times in my last 6 months. We had a young girl doing her mental health nursing degree. She was an amazing member of staff. She was fed up of all the sea and was my partner in fighting the company. She walked out after having enough. Then the manager accused her of phoning care standards in a full house meeting. I then admitted it wasn't her, it was me, as I was sick of all the crap and the illegal things they were trying. I mentioned there was duck all support and all the company were doing was squeezing money where they could, and they didn't care for any of the service users. I then had one day off work and returned to find the manager wasn't in, and he had got somebody else to tell me they were removing me off the team of the guy I was working with. Bear in mind this patient was nonverbal autistic, was new to adult care when he came to us, and was middle-aged. We worked our arses off for years with him to expand his diet, to get him swimming, get him horse riding, and just improve his behaviors. The company pulled me from him because I pushed back, like I was supposed to do, as I had a duty of care for this person. I had been this man's key worker for 7 years and was proud of what we achieved with him. It literally took me 9 months of progress to get him in a swimming pool. But because they couldn't handle a bit of pushback, they punished me and the patient by splitting us up. I stood up and handed my keys over and told them to shove the job there and then. They were already understaffed that day, as usual, and I made it worse by leaving. I interviewed for the same job, but through the NHS 2 weeks later, and started working with them for so much more pay, more support, and less responsibility, and better working practices. Story 4. I was working shifts for Xerox many years ago, and I was suffering terrible insomnia. They were then completely awful to work for, kept getting my pay wrong, letting people go for no reason, changing our shifts, etc. They asked me to walk someone out who had been sacked. Not security or a manager. Just little old me having to walk a colleague out the door. We walked out the door and went to the pub, got pissed, and when I got home, I emailed them telling them that I wasn't going back. Story 5. I was a night shift manager for Morrison. Went into it having worked retail a decade prior for Sainsbury's, so it was under no illusions on how wank retail can be. There were 4 night shift managers in total. We did 4 on 3 off. 2 of them were okay. The other one, Belland, had been with the company since he was 16 and thought he was the crap. Had this idea he was in charge. We fell out quite frequently. All came to a head on a Saturday night. He came in with the hump, took it out on the staff, and belittled me in front of the team. That got me ducking heated. He then dropped he'd taken Sunday off to watch the League Cup final, which would have left me on my own. This further riled me up as I had requested it off, and he cried saying he couldn't do it on his own. It got to about midnight, so 4 hours in, and I'd had enough of his passive-aggressive comments. I sat on my break looking at jobs and saw 2. One a warehouse manager role for a new company, the other a night manager for Carlsberg. I knew I'd get either, if not both roles. Rung my fiance, told her I was quitting. Put my store keys and discount card in the store manager's office. I told him I was going home. He went to grab me and I point blank told him if he touched me, I'd drop him. Cue a shouting match and told him to duck himself and this job because I quit. He refused to open the door to let me out, so I set the alarm off by going through a fire exit. As soon as I got home, I left the WhatsApp groups and removed the Google Share Drive crap from my phone. The HR manager rang me on Sunday, but she was a sneaky little tried the emotional blackmail card. Told her it might work on her husband, but it doesn't work for me and that I won't be coming back. They paid me till the end of the month and I started the new role at the beginning of April. I have never walked out on the spot like that before, but the idiot had been a problem for me since day one. Like outright ignoring me for weeks on end, tried to call me out for having a chest infection in a WhatsApp group crap like that. Story 6. When they wouldn't let me have 1 week leave to go on a holiday that I had booked and paid for with my girlfriend, whose mom had just passed, I just walked out of the shop mid-shift and never went back. I remember fondly the repeated phone calls from one of the managers saying, "You're not in as much trouble as you think you are. Can you come back in to talk about next month's rota?" I thought, I'm not in any trouble at all, mate. I don't work for you anymore. Cheers. Story 7. Working at the airport. I should have known it was going to be a crap show just from the interview. When I arrived for the interview, I went to where I'd been told, then got told I had to drive over to another building, got there and was led up some stairs and asked to wait in a corridor outside the interviewing manager's office. While waiting, several people walked past. One guy walked past me a few times, going in, out of the office, and then eventually someone called my name from inside the office. It was the guy who had walked past me a few times. Anyway, interview went okay, and I was told I could start that coming Monday. It was shift work, so I was told what time my shift started and who I needed to ask for. Got there on my first day. The guy I needed to see was the shift supervisor. Although he did tell me he had no actual supervisor power, he was just the longest serving member of the team. While showing me what I was going to be doing, he constantly moaned about the place, saying how it had driven him into depression and that he had only just come back from 3 months sick, telling me to not stay there long or it would do the same to me. He didn't introduce me to anyone else within the team. The job itself was straightforward. It was putting the frozen meals into the metal oven, which then get loaded on the plane. There was a list of the special meals, dietary requirement stuff, which you had to write the seat number on the lid. The supervisor guy was quite condescending, going through it all in great detail and asking me at every opportunity if I understood, even though it was a very basic task. I was then left alone to get on with it. I was told when it was time for a break, shown where the break room, and at the same time, shown where I would be clocking in, out. My clock card would be ready the next day. I went back the next day, saw my clock card wasn't there, so went over to the place I was supposed to be working. Supervisor guy tells me to do the same as the day before. For whatever reason, he was pretty aggressive about it. And when another guy asked him something, he shouted back at him, calling him stupid, without saying a word to anyone. I walked to my car and drove home. Story 8. Did a kitchen porter job during the summer holidays as a teenager. Basically, just washing dishes and basic meal prep. On my first shift, the entire established kitchen staff quit. Chef, sous chef, other KPN manager panicked and asked me if I could cook. At that point, I realized my summer would be hell and joined the rest in walking out. Story 9. I own a small transport company, go out on the road myself, and ended up getting on board with a very well-known same-day delivery company after they'd just won over a new contract. They promised me the world in terms of decent money, regular work, and overall really secure work. I needed to start in Manchester every day. I live in Leeds, but they promised me a paid job from Leeds to Manchester every day. Then I did a regular run from Manchester to Leeds, and then a few deliveries to various other towns and cities. But I found myself driving across to Manchester empty most days, which was 40 plus miles with an empty van, thus losing money to begin with. Then, after my route, I'd finish up either in Chesterfield, Hull, or Grimsby, again with a job home. Occasionally got jobs home from Hull, paid at peanuts, which was less than what the fuel cost. I stayed as they kept promising me they'd sort out the empty routes. But then, after about 2 months of empty promises, I told them I'll do Manchester to Leeds and find my own work on an afternoon as I was sick of driving home empty and losing money. They accepted this. But then, the problem still arose going to Manchester empty daily. Some days I'd manage to get my own work over there, but not always. Again, they promised they'd sort it out for me. But one day I got talking to a good friend in the same business who told me I should avoid them like the plague. He told me to go on their website as a customer, type in postcode to postcode of my routes, and see how much a customer would pay. I was getting £50 for a customer paying $400. I appreciate they have depots, employed staff, fuel, etc. to pay for, but they were royally taking the piss. The following day, yet again, I went to Manchester empty. So I did my route back to Leeds, unloaded my van, gave my scanner to a manager and said, "See you later. I'm done. Self-employed and well within my rights to walk anyway. But I wish I hadn't have worked there for 2 months, as I turned down higher paying but irregular work for this stable contract. Ended up losing more money with them than I was earning." Story 10. I had a retail job at Oliver Bonus for a summer, which was supposed to be permanent. The manager of the store was a power tripper and had her favorites whilst bullying everyone else. I was told to be a greeter on Saturdays, then was told I was talking to customers too much. She criticized me in front of customers who stuck up for me as I bit my tongue. She left some of the best workers I've ever met in tears with the way she treated them. The best part of the job came when she'd given up on me, and I could just work in the stockroom. I got into work one day to be told that all of the full-time staff were going to London for a big company bash, and that I needed to leave in 10 minutes to get the train to work in the Edinburgh branch. When working there, I found out that every other store talks about how bad the Glasgow store team morale is in comparison to their store. I was close to tears hearing that it wasn't me that was the issue, and had the best day working in the Edinburgh shop. Then, a couple of days later, the would-be manager of a new Lush branch came in, and I'd helped her pick, put outfits, and do the usual nice customer service. She asked me if I liked my job here, and I didn't say anything negative, but was obviously ready to leave. She offered me a job in the new store when it opened. I handed in my notice and got a bunch of emotional blackmail thrown at me by the manager about how I'd wasted her time. In my last week, the owner of the company was doing a tour of shops with dinners with the team. He was such a sound guy. He was very inquisitive about our ideas, and I loved giving a tip on how to improve furniture sales, which were implemented in the days after I left. Her face was so enjoyable to see as I spoke, especially when he was taking notes and giving positive feedback. Said manager is no longer at that shop. I saw her at a train station last year, and my blood still boiled about 10 years later. Story 11. One of the store managers screamed at me for not leaving my huge cage of products and going to the tills when till staff were called. I couldn't leave my cage because it would have blocked a fire exit and an entire aisle in the store. I was a couple meters away from the warehouse doors, so planned to dump the cage inside and head to the tills. It would have taken me longer to walk the cage all the way back to my department. I got in there and one of the warehouse staff stopped me and told me not to bring more cages in and to tell others not to because the warehouse was full. It was raining heavy, and they usually kept cages outside during store opening times, but they had to bring them all in, so there was no room in there. This conversation lasted about 20 seconds. It was quick. Manager stormed into the warehouse and screamed at me for not responding to the call, for till staff and I shouldn't be hiding in the warehouse, having a chat. Tried to tell him I wasn't chatting and that I couldn't dump the cage due to health and safety, but he screamed even more. Both me and the warehouse staff were open-mouthed, shocked. Everyone was staring. I decided in that moment I was quitting. So I did. I told him that I quit because I'm not having a manager scream at me. He then realized his mistake and backtracked and told me not to quit, but I clocked out and never went back. Thing is, it was Christmas and they were short of staff, so he fudged up by being abusive and lost another worker. I was also the only other person trained for customer services, so they lost there too. They always need 2 customer service staff at all times. Main manager kept calling and asking me to go back, even offered a pay increase, but I said no. Not for as long as that particular manager works there, that he has a history of being verbally abusive to staff, and I was done with it and tired of him getting away with it. Last I heard, he was moved to head office, after several more complaints. Story 12. Games industry, I'd handed my notice in and was working my last 4 weeks. 1 week into it, the project manager had a go at me for talking to a colleague from another team who'd come into our room, 3 in the room. 2 of us had been playing the same game as the colleague. Around 80 of us would be playing the same game over lunch, it was the way. To have a quick jibe at us about the lunch game we'd all just played. It must have been 3 minutes into work time. I asked him, what should I have done? Sorry, mate, don't talk to me, it's work time, get out. Well, yes, So you're telling me I should tell the lead animator on another team to get out of Outroom? Yes. I said I thought that was rude. It was a literal 30-second exchange, he told me. If that was my attitude, I might as well go now, and stormed out. I'd worked silly hours for that company. End of projects were weekenders for 3 months, Saturdays for last 6 months. The main reason for leaving, to be honest, and the way I'd seen other colleagues treated was deplorable. One got sacked after he'd helped train me up in the area I ended up working. Then when they realized I was decent at it, they got rid of the other guy in that team, leaving me as the only one doing it on the game. I'll never forget that second guy's face as he carried his stuff out of the room. You could see he blamed me for it. So I popped into his room up the corridor, told him I was going to take him up on his offer, and I'm off. He looked shocked. I'd taken him at his word. When? Now. But you'll miss your 6-month bonus at the end of the month. Shrug. I don't care. Bye. Picked up my stuff and have never felt lighter as I walked out of that place. I'd already got freelancer work lined up anyway, and a partner who supported me. 20 years on, and I'm still self-employed and thoroughly enjoying it. The company went pop 4 years later. Story 13. I'm a joiner to trade. Had an accident at work, which meant I was unable to continue working in the trade. I worked a couple of jobs for a few years. 2 of them were for a metal fabrication company. I then saw open days advertised for an apprenticeship at a big steelworks. I was told I was too old and too experienced to give me an apprenticeship, but instead offered me a job. It was minimum wage because I wasn't technically qualified to do the work, but was promised wage rises depending on the quality of the work. It was easy work that came naturally to me. I was complimented numerous times that it was clear that I didn't have any formal training on how to assemble the structural steel, but I was still producing correct work. Everything was checked and measured by inspectors before permanently welded. It even got to the point that I was teaching the apprentices that did get the opportunity my way of thinking and producing the same outcome. Over a year later, I was still on minimum wage. One of the apprentices who was over 21 was now earning more than me after being given a wage rise. Then I found out the guy whose only job was to sweep the floor was on $2 an hour more than me. I asked for a meeting with manager to discuss my wages and was told, because I wasn't qualified, that I didn't deserve any more money to just get back to work. I walked out straight away, didn't even finish the day. Just packed up my tools and jumped into my car. Story 14. I worked 9 months in it for an occupational health company in Uckfield who could not have cared less for the mental health of their own staff. It was just a fun game for the owners to play until they got bored. This was the 3rd company like it they'd created, built up, and then would sell for millions. None of them needed to work at all, and it showed. I've never worked anywhere where the morale of the staff was so low. Only the owners and top management wanted to be there. And to top it off, the commute was crap too. I was in a team of 3, and during a team meeting, one of the guys rightfully lost his crap because the clueless director had turned on conditional access without warning right before Christmas, which basically denied 70% of the staff access to 365. He refused to turn it off again and give us time to address the issues with the devices. They didn't pay overtime and used the old excuse of getting yourself noticed by working harder, and good things would happen. You were expected to use your own vehicle to go to external sites. No expenses claims because, hey, they'll notice how loyal you are by paying for your own petrol and wear and tear. When one of the guys got another job and left, I realized that if the other guy I worked with left too, I'd be the only support in the entire company with 9 months of experience in the job. My wife told me they were recruiting where she works, and I applied and actually got offered the job during the interview. Walked in the next day and quit, and it was the greatest feeling ever. I went out to lunch with a few people I'd got to know there, and instead of going back, I just got in my car and drove home. Got a text from my manager a bit later asking when I was coming back, and I replied that I wasn't, and he replied that I'd be docked half a day's pay. Duck 'em. Story 15. Worked as a supply teacher. In one school, I saw a group of Year 11 lads walking down the corridor. They were clearly planning something. One deliberately dropped a shoulder and barged into another teacher who was carrying a load of books. They all started laughing. I grabbed the kid who did it and sent another off to get the head. The head showed up but refused to do anything. Apparently, my word was nothing and his staff member in pain irrelevant. I was told that the school has special circumstances. Told the head he was an utter coward, and if he's so afraid of the kids, he needed another job. Gave him my timetable for the rest of the day and that he could teach those classes. Turns out that I was just one of many supply teachers who refused to work there. Forget open days. If you want to know what a school is like, ask supply teachers or non-teaching staff like dinner ladies or cleaners. Story 16. Used to be a site tester at a railway company. My boss's boss wanted me to test a point machine at a project I've never seen before and only had documentation for in German. One thing I did know is using that machine requires a certification course from the manufacturer, which I didn't have. We were the manufacturer. Boss said, do it or you're fired. I was offered a job earlier that week for the same role at a competitor, so I took it as a sign and left. Story 17. was bullied on a cleaning job for 3 years, in my early 20s by office staff and their ringleader, the project manager. The staff would constantly put nonsense complaints in about me, ranging from didn't empty a bin that didn't have any trash in it to he smells, probably because I work my ass off 12 hours a day cleaning up after scumbags. I even had the payroll lady threaten my wages because I allegedly didn't sign in. I did, even though I start 2 hours before her every day. But the worst of it was the project manager. I was his personal punching bag. Every day he would belittle my work, my personal life, scream and shout at me constantly, and even tried to frame for stealing at one point. When that failed, he still gave me a bollocking as if it were my fault. Towards the end of the job, I broke down in tears to my dad and told him I was suffering from depression and anxiety, to which I started therapy and medication and shortly returned to work. I informed my PM about this when I returned. The following Friday rolls around and the PM gestures me to join him in the shower room and starts lecturing me about the showers that have been broken since even I had arrived there. He starts screaming and shouting at me like I'm the ducking plumber, and once he has cooled off, he leaves. That's when I just walked off the job, took several months to work on my mental health whilst getting sick, pay from the gits, and vowed to never let anyone ever speak to me like that again. If you ever encounter this sort of toxicity in the workplace, I would highly recommend leaving. Peace out. Story 18. One HR manager became my temp manager and she didn't like me. So over a couple of months, she lied about my written promised pay increase. I got it to find the email for me. Micromanaged my work and requested for me to write an hour-by-hour account of my working day to prove I was working. I was positioned in front of her desk, away from my team. I was asked to undocumented meetings about my lateness. I was contracted to work from 9 a.m., and she marked me as late if I arrived any time later than 8:50 a.m. I got told off for not being phone ready by 8:55 a.m. I didn't even have a work phone and wasn't customer facing. The men in my team arrived at 8:30 a.m. and had breakfast in the canteen until 9:15 a.m. But because she liked them, she said they started work from 8:30 a.m. My work was claimed by my supervisor, who spent most of the day in a secluded office at the other end of the building skiving. Note, his pay was more than double mine, and I was more qualified and more experienced. The last straw was when I was actually late, 9:30 a.m., due an accident on the motorway, and they said I should have foreseen that happening, and they were going to review my newly awarded pay increase due to it. They made me attend that last undocumented meeting at 4 p.m., and at 4:30 p.m. I'd got in touch with an old temping agency who arranged for an interview the next day. So I left at 5 p.m. that day, Friday, and never went back. I was honest with the new employer and started with him on the Monday and worked for him for about 5 years, with no complaints at all. He valued me and is now a friend. Story 19. Worked for a small business for a few years. I put my all into the job and had got on well with the owner, who was pleased with my work. One day, for no apparent reason, he just seemed to snap. I think he may have mental health problems, as he would go through manic periods followed by a depression. But this time it was different. He began to play mind games against me constantly, belittle me in front of the team, and would shout at me aggressively in one-to-one meetings. He started threatening to sack my mom, who also worked for him at another site, if I didn't carry out a range of increasingly bizarre requests. He would also undermine any decisions I made regarding my team, most of whom were apprentices under the age of 20. I started feeling extremely depressed and thought about ending my life most days, as I couldn't navigate the minefield that seemed to have popped up out of the blue. One day we had an office meeting and he started taking the piss out of me in front of my team while simultaneously calling me a liar over something completely random that I absolutely wasn't lying about. Suddenly I lost it. I just started laughing in his face, which was a really random stress response, and got up saying, "Okay, I'm done, goodbye." He said nothing but stared at me in shock. I collected my belongings and went straight to citizens' advice. Ended up sending him a detailed grievance letter and left it at that. Wish I'd sued him, looking back. Story 20. When I was 18, I worked at Primark, hell on earth, during the Saturday and Sunday shifts before I went to uni. A very drunk woman, shopping for sandals for her beach wedding, came in holding a half-full bottle of gin in her hand. I got told by my supervisor to ask her to leave. I asked why this wouldn't be a security job, and she said we didn't need to scare the other customers. I go up to this woman and ask her if she could either put the bottle away or leave. She didn't take it well. As I turned around, she threw the full bottle at the back on my head. I had blood dripping down the back of my neck and went to the toilet to clean it up. Came out and my supervisor called me in for an immediate disciplinary over my conduct in handling a difficult customer and my inability to de-escalate. Amidst this, she just used it as an excuse to berate me and tell me how crap I was at my job. A 64-year-old woman screaming at a bloodied 18-year-old for an hour. Midway through, I just felt my brain switch and went, "I think you need to retire. because your brain is obviously too ducked to handle this job anymore." And she went completely insane and started crying. I just walked up and left. She called security to bring me back and they refused. So she followed me through the store, continuing to scream at me. Got a call about 2 days later begging me to come back for an apology. So I did, and before anyone could open their mouth, I said, "I'm done," and just left the shop floor. She ended up getting sacked that afternoon. Story 21. I was working in a high school, and I had been given the opportunity to move about 70 miles away for a job that I couldn't say no to. Once in a lifetime thing. I handed in my notice and told them that even though my notice period was 3 months, I could only give 9.5 weeks. Still plenty for my role either way. They rejected my notice and told me that when I moved, I had secured a house and signed my new contract, they still expected me to get the train to work, into London, every day, to fulfill my notice period, and tell my new job to wait a few more weeks for me. I didn't need the job for money at that point. I told them I won't be doing that, and the best I can do is what I stated. They had convinced themselves I'd give in and stay. The only thing that kept me from quitting on the spot was the people I worked with, other than my boss and the higher-ups above him. I don't actually know what happened, but I made it evidently clear that I would be working the notice that I stated. Over the weeks, I made sure to write up anything helpful, tidy up my area, and slowly move out anything of mine. On the day I was going to leave, I went around and said my goodbyes and then upped and left around midday. I never heard from anyone there after the fact, and we moved successfully the next day. I now earn double what I did and have an actual career path. The only thing I regret is staying so long. I thought some of those people were good friends. Clearly not. Story 22. I was working in a supermarket and my manager he had his own little rules for things, and I was sick of having to ask, "Why didn't you approve this?" Or "Why is that missing on every pay packet?" He was just a small, unliked man who liked his power trips. I'd eventually get the money owed, but think of the sort of guy that times bog breaks. One day I'd hoofed it to get there on time, and my wages needed sorting out again. I was in the middle of refilling the chillers, and I needed to restock the milk, and I just thought, duck it. Told the deli counter manager that if idiot asks where I am, tell me I've quit, and walked out. Apparently, they have my Nino on record and will never hire me again. Walked into a temp job that afternoon. Story 23. Sales saying we support systems we didn't. Sent me on a 2-day intro course that's little more than a presentation of the controllers and engineering tool, then sent me to maintain, and actually commission properly, a problem child they never did properly in the first place. Obviously, I wasn't knowledgeable enough of the system to figure out the issues. Each visit there were more issues to look at, and nothing was progressing. I asked them to please just pay for a subby for a few visits. Customer escalated, and next thing I know, there's a meeting with the customer's head of estates, my manager, and our MD. They were threatening to not just pull the contract for this place, but also their other 20 buildings, and have another company come in to recommission entirely and pursue the cost. Manager asked me essentially to be the scapegoat, and apologies saying I was new to it and was out of my depth. It wasn't the company's fault. I should have raised my difficulties. I did, every time I saw it in my diary, and every time I left site after an unsuccessful day. In the meeting, I explained, I'm not new to the industry, I'm not junior, and that I'm an accredited expert on 2 out of 3 systems we actually do support, and another we don't do. Told manager he'd have my notice that evening and left for home. Unsurprisingly, that manager was let go shortly after I left because of a long list of issues. Surprisingly, MD hired me back in a more senior role 6 or 7 years later, despite embarrassing them, and today admits it was justified when I had my own industry reputation to uphold. Story 24. Got a job in a pet shop, aquatics, reptiles, invertebrates, stuff I have tons of experience in. First day, someone comes in and wants to buy a red-tailed boa constrictor. They tell me they have a small enclosure, which would be fine for a bit, but I advise that they will need to upgrade soon and that red-tailed boas can get to almost 10 foot, and that I've handled one that was about 12 foot long. The manager of the shop had a right go at me and outright told me I should have lied to the customer to make the sale. I walked out there and reported them to the council due to that, and a few other things I saw and heard. Story 25. Left a pub job once. Because a girl who worked there got wind I liked her due to an idiot mate, and she was most definitely not interested in return. All became way too awkward. I was going through a difficult time anyway, and due to some other work that had previously just been a side gig picking up, I didn't really need the money anymore. So I just decided it would be less awkward and easier for everyone if I just stopped going in. Funny, sad thing was, a new general manager had started a few months prior, who had been a bit of a tilt towards a lot of the staff, and there'd been something of a mass exodus. Easy to replace pub staff so we weren't left short. But he was aware it was because of him. He thought my leaving was down to him, too. And apparently, as I'd been there a long time before him and liked the place, it was a straw that broke the camel's back, and he decided to quit. I felt quite bad, as I was one of the few staff who liked him outside of his work mode, and he'd opened up to me about quietly suffering from depression and worrying people didn't like him. I'd assured him he was a good manager and was just running a tight ship like the guy who owned the place expected of him. Story 26. I worked as a laborer for a guy building his own house when I was 16. He was peculiar and very difficult to get a straight answer from. He asked me to hang cables for sockets from the upstairs to the ground floor before we fixed the plasterboard. Apparently, I cut the wire too short, but the guy never told me where he wanted his sockets. I told him to stick his job through his tape measure over the hedge on my way down the drive. I went back to get my money from him that evening, and he thought it was all a joke. The last job I left was because our company had been bought out and they decided to close our site. I stayed until the very last day with a few others. The manager in charge of this closure had promised me a job working remotely, but never given me a written job offer. When the last day came, I rang them and said I had shut my computer down and had left it with someone on site from head office. They couldn't believe I had accepted another job and I wouldn't be staying based on their verbal proposal. I'm glad I left. They took our company's products and turned the business we had worked hard to build for over 10 years into complete crap. I now work for a competitor, and we are doing really well. Story 27. I had been speaking to a colleague when he asked me why I didn't tell him I was leaving. I was pretty confused, to be honest, until I saw my job advertised in the local paper whilst I was making a cup of coffee in the work kitchen. I was absolutely fuming. I had spent 2 years getting their stock system back up to scratch since the owner's nephew royally ruined it and deleted most of the stock information because he figured he could just disguise his cock-ups by deleting stuff and nobody would ever know. Going through years of paperwork to basically build a way of making things traceable once again, never once asking for any help or increased pay, despite the fact I was working goodness knows how many hours unpaid to do it. Phoned the girlfriend and told her about it, and she told me to walk. We had enough savings behind it, and she could support us whilst I looked for another job, so I was extremely fortunate. Joke was on them. I was the only one who knew how to do the job, use the system, access all the data, as it was all password protected. I hadn't quite finalized everything yet, and they had never given me someone to help me, even though I suggested it would be beneficial to teach someone else the system in case I was ill, etc. 147 phone calls later, and I think they realized their cock-up. They had to start again. Story 28. I was 18 working in a shop that was insanely busy at Christmas. Made 90% of our income for the year in the 6-week lead-up. Most of the year we gift wrapped, but in that 6-week period paper was banned as it was too time-consuming and everyone would want it. My boss was hardworking but terrifying. Had a customer come in who I spent loads of time with and weighs a loyal customer. He spent around $500, huge sale for us, 1/6 of the day's target, and he wanted one specific thing wrapped. I explained the rule, but said I would do it on my lunch. I would double bag to hide it. Please don't tell other customers. On my lunch break as I was finishing the bow, my manager walked in, started yelling at me, calling me stupid. I tried to explain, but she yelled over me some more, so I raised my voice and said, "You don't get to talk to me like that," and walked out. I sat shivering and panicking because I really needed the job and it was cold. After my lunch, I was over, I returned, and the manager and I didn't interact for about 3 weeks. When we were alone one morning, I got a sincere apology, and maybe the only apology she's ever given, and we worked together really well for another 3 years. I've kept that mentality ever since, and it has served me well. Story 29. I started a part-time job working for a financial advisor who was a friend. On the first day, early January, I arrived. There was no desk or chair for me. He swept a pile of files off a table in the corner, along with other detritus, and found a manky chair in the back room. He then took me into a dilapidated garage at the back of the office, no heating, and showed me the 20 broken filing cabinets and piles of Mace-key paperwork that he'd neglected to file for over 10 years. I did my best but wanted to cry at that point. Over the following 2 weeks, he'd disappear from the office for hours at a time without explanation. It got awkward when his wife kept ringing, asking where he was. I obviously told her he was out, and I didn't know when he'd be back, but she kept interrogating me. I still, to this day, don't know where he kept going. 3 weeks in, I had a course that had been booked and arranged before I started the job. During the course, payday came and went. I rang boss, asking where my pay was. He said he forgot and would drop a check in. He did leave the check, but that was the final straw. I didn't go back after my course. We are still friends, but he agrees that he's not cut out to be a boss. I managed to get another job the following week. Story 30. 13 days in without a day off, I called my boss Told him to come collect my keys as the location will be left unattended. Before this call, I called a friend and segued into another job ready for after the next 4 days. It was a done deal. He turned up, asked what's going on, told him I don't appreciate being abandoned weeks prior to this. He just ghosted me, didn't visit, didn't offer any help. Other management were getting, so I worked a full week, 12-hour shifts each day, then got to the next week, worked the full days. I was contracted to bit nurture my hours, and had enough. Work-life balance is important to me. He championed this mentality until he didn't. I tried to mediate with him, and again, nothing. So it was time to go. I also had a company audit on my second to last day. I failed by 2 points, 83% instead of an 85% for a pass. I'd always hit 95 to 97 and was never even given a thumbs up. The auditor asked me to sit down with him and go over the report. Told him, with all due respect and nothing personal to him, the company can shove it up their arse. I've quit and I'm out of here tomorrow. It was like a warm sunshine summer breeze when I walked out. Story 31. I was accused of stealing from the till, and even when I said it couldn't possibly have been me, my manager swore it could only have been me because it was my card that was used. I was in surgery that particular day for a pilonidal cyst. She then said that I was spreading malicious lies about another staff member that I was actually very good friends with by supposedly saying that said friend was a terrible mother who deserved to have her kids taken away from her. I apparently said this to said friend's sister who had started work at the company 3 days prior, and who I had never actually spoken to at this point. This was the straw that broke me, and told her to shove her crappy paid job up her arse, as I was done being ground into the ground and bullied by various management when all I wanted was to be left alone to do the job I knew how to do very well. They tried to get me back rather half-heartedly, but wouldn't get rid of the staff member who had accused me of saying what I'd said, and it was the best choice I ever made. It turned out later that it was another girl who was stealing, one might I add, that I had voiced suspicions about 6 months prior when the till was 50 pounds down on a day only. She was working it. Story 32. Asking me to change batch numbers on a food product. I gave them the middle finger and walked out. Later, I reported them to food standards and environmental health. Story 33. Whilst temping during university, I worked a load of different jobs. One was in a pot and pan manufacturer. The job was all right and the people were lovely. I gave a lift to one of the girls so she could get to her bus stop early, and the next day one of the older staff was like, "You shouldn't have given her a lift, CZ, now the supervisor is going to get jealous." I didn't think anything of it, CZ. There was no way I was interested in this girl. After lunch, I was asked by the aforementioned supervisor to scrub out some drums that were in the warehouse yard. Without PPE, you know I'm doing chemistry at uni, right? These drums had residue on them that I wouldn't have touched without a respirator and full body protection. He didn't think I needed them, so I asked to see the COSH documentation for these chemicals. He refused to let me see them, and I left. Story 34. I remember working at Weatherspoons during uni. My kitchen manager had agreed to give me a large chunk of the summer off. This was normal for the students working there, as my lease wasn't for a full year, and I wouldn't have anywhere to live for 6 weeks. As the time approaches, I notice I'm still on the rota beyond the start of my time off. I spoke to my kitchen manager about it, who flat out denied granting me the time off. I distinctly remembered her writing it in her work diary, so I told her to show me the diary. She opened it up and refused to show me the pages, but I caught a glimpse of Download Festival scrawled across the whole week. I pulled a piece of paper out from the printer next to me, wrote out my 2 weeks notice, using about 10 words in total, gave it to her, and walked down to do my shift. After 5 minutes, I thought, why am I working for her when she tried to screw me over? I left, and as far as I'm aware, she had to sell her festival ticket as there wasn't enough staff for that week. Apparently, she also tried claiming 1 or 2 others' holidays were never approved, but they were already long gone for the summer, so she was out of options. Story 35. Managing Director. Hi, PK. Can you do this task? Does task people complain about task as it involves some of them having to travel in a few weeks to client office, so they complain to my direct boss, who has been nothing but an overbearing tyrant since I started. One of them tells me, "But your direct boss says you shouldn't have done the task and you were impulsive." Me. "Hi, direct boss. Please know that there is a reason for everything I do, and now you have told staff to ignore the fact they need to travel, and the work I do is pointless and not thought out." Direct boss. "I think it's silly to make people travel, and you should not have done it, and I was letting them know." Me. Forwards email to direct boss from managing director, which reads, "Please arrange a meeting on site for every person who bills to this client. This needs to be arranged by tomorrow, and meeting must take place by the end of the month and should continue on a monthly basis." And tells him to take it up with MD direct boss. Replies with, "You should have read between the lines." Within 5 minutes, I sent my notice into HR. Literally can never be wrong. Who wouldn't reply with, "Sorry, I didn't realize you were following direct instructions"? Get story 36. I was working in a Tesco Express in a village. It was the sort of everyone knows everyone village, where I'd get the same pensioners come in at the same time each day for their papers. I was there for 5 years, and everyone knew me by name, and I knew them. Anyway, my mom became ill and was bedbound for months. I ended up taking the responsibility of looking after her and had to reduce the amount I was working, often having to leave work early to help her and stuff. One Friday night was particularly bad, and I was up helping my mom until about 3 a.m. with a 6 a.m. start at work. I went into work and felt so ill from being sleep deprived. After about an hour, I was sick in the back of the shop. I spoke to my manager and asked to go home, to which he shouted at me and accused me of not caring about my job and having no dedication to the company. That was the last straw. I lost my crap, getting a burst of energy. Called him every expletive I could think of, told him, "Duck you and duck your job." I walked out, threw a few things off the shelves, and never went back. I could not say duck Tesco enough. Story 37. Years ago, I went for a job as a care assistant in a residential home. The interview went well, but at the end, the manager said, "You are overly qualified and experienced for this role. I am looking for a deputy manager if you're interested." So I took the job. It was just bad after bad. So much stuff was wrong or not in place. The home didn't have a single care plan written up for any of the 18 residents. My first job was care planning. I'd been there about a month, finding more and more things that were wrong. Then we got notice that we were to be inspected by the CQC the following week. My manager dropped a bombshell that we had no documentation for residents' finances and a large sum of money missing. We also didn't have the correct lockable cabinets for controlled substances, and some of those were missing. I asked her where the duck everything had gone, and she didn't answer. That was it. I walked straight out. I advised other staff to start looking for other jobs because this home will be shut. About 1 month later, the home was shut down, and I'm glad I left. Didn't want my name on that pile of mess when I had only been there several weeks. Story 38. I'm normally so calm and level-headed, but I've hit this point a couple of times. Usually if I've been shown such an utter lack of respect that it's actually beneficial for me to burn that bridge. One instance where I was told the job was 60 to 80% from home and temporary on paper, but intending to find someone permanent. After 2 months of being in the office every day and questioning a few times where the WFH days are coming from, they even started to distance themselves from their comments about wanting someone permanent too, so I just got up and walked out. Another instance where some in my team were slacking, so we kept having these team talks with management threatening to sack anyone below a certain target. I asked and they said, it doesn't apply to me, but I still had to be there. Then one day my TL said she prevented them from actually doing this, but we need to bring our targets up so it doesn't come to that again. Anywhere that's prepared to sack you based on a number on a spreadsheet without even speaking to you isn't worth your time either. So I walked out there as well. Story 39. Had a review, got told I was brilliant with the customers. They've had some really good feedback about me, and they are happy with how I get on with the other staff members, and basically nothing negative at all. Then next few weeks after the review, I had more back of house shifts for no apparent reason. So I asked about it, and they said, it's what was written in my comments in the review. Told them I hadn't been asked to write anything, and I certainly wouldn't write that because I like to be customer-facing. The floor manager who did my review wrote it because she didn't like me, and the other floor manager had rotated me on shifts, and the one who didn't like me had changed the rota, so she didn't have to work with me. She'd also put, I didn't want a promotion, and I was happy how it was, so someone else got it. She ended up getting a warning and transferred, and then sacked for doing the same thing at a different branch. I still hadn't got any more customer-facing hours, so when a different employer asked me to work for them, I jumped at the chance. Story 40. Customer came in stating he had an appointment with me to get his phone fixed, despite me not having an appointment system in place. I'd actually finished 2 hours prior and politely told him no. He got belligerent and was fairly offensive to me, at which point I told him I wouldn't fix it at all and to try his luck in a different shop since he wants to call me names. He went ballistic. I left for home. Next day, I got dragged over the coals by the boss and the assistant manager. Let them go off. Waited till they were finished and asked, "You done?" They said, "Yes, we're done." And that attitude isn't going to get you far. I said, "I'm not going far. I only live 15 minutes away. Enjoy your Christmas short-staffed. I quit." Cue the backpedaling and the please work till Boxing Day, so I don't have to from the boss. I agreed to shut them up and get out. Didn't show up again. Got a very angry call the next day in which he berated me again. I hung up. He proceeded to stalk me on LinkedIn for months. This is what happens when you don't back your staff to make good decisions. Story 41. Many years ago, worked in a care home. Got quite badly physically assaulted by a resident during a waking night shift, and when I pulled the emergency cord for assistance, the only other member of staff on duty, a supervisor, locked themselves in the office and left me to it. Her excuse later was she had meds out, so it was a health and safety risk to leave them and come help me. I asked why she couldn't just lock the meds in the office and come help stop this guy punching me in the face. No answer. I had my 6-month probation meeting the next day and was told that they were extending it because, and I quote, I was a defective, not an effective member of the team. Handed my notice in the next day. Ducked that for a game of soldiers. In a beautiful moment of karma, about 3 months later, I got a call off some higher up to tell me the home manager had been sacked for being C, amongst other things. After a complaint from 2 other supervisors, they had reviewed my personnel file, were very sorry, and would I consider returning. I'll leave my reply to the imagination. Clue, it wasn't. Yes, story 42. I once worked at a large computer parts store. It was extremely busy, and they were incredibly arsy about returns at the best of times. At the time, the policy was testing takes 7 days. On one rather busy day, a guy had come in and bought a hard drive. He had been out of the shop probably less than an hour. The drive didn't work. He was a student and needed his PC to get his work finished. Poor kid seemed genuinely panicked. I told him about the awful test policy, and he begged me to replace it as he couldn't afford another. So he asked if he could speak to the manager, who was at the time talking to the owner of the company. I said, "Sorry. Phil, can I just borrow you a sec? This guy is asking to speak to a manager." The owner looks up with a sour face, eyes like daggers at me, then glares straight at the guy standing at the counter and bellows, "The manager is busy. Tell him to duck off." I just said, "Tell him yourself. Duck this crap," took off my crappy polo shirt, dumped it on the table, and walked out of the building, story 43. Didn't exactly walk straight out, but my resignation was ready and printed, so when my of a boss decided he was going to fire me, I beat him to it. They drew it out with a laughable, one-sided grievance process, which I was never going to win, and then accepted my resignation with immediate effect and put me on gardening leave for a month. My boss, a man who thought nothing of making people cry for no reason, made sure he was out of the office when it all went down. Big man. The company didn't survive lockdown. No tears were shed. Story 44. I worked for a concrete frame specialist construction company in London. Sort of fell into the job and industry through family connection. First 3 to 4 years were tough and had a real impact on my mental health, generally working 60 hours per week, but great team and each day was quite different. At the end of the mega project, I was moved to a subdivision within the company that had a contact with Westfield, so shop fit-outs with structural works in essence. The commute went from 45 mins to 90 mins each way. I was given a senior position, so had to get in earlier and leave later. New smaller team, didn't click with anyone. One day, sick of it all, just called the missus and said I'm quitting. Handed in my notice that day with a 2-week notice period. Soon as that happened, got offered a fairly sizable pay rise, but by that point I was so done with it. So left, struggled massively financially for 3 months, found a new job, and 5 years later couldn't have made a better decision. A typical story of, now you've handed in your notice here, is more money you likely deserved months ago.